Hello my lovely Misfitians, and welcome back to another video. This is the last video of our series of painting a leaping deer in a snowy background. If you are new here, make sure to check out the playlist down below if you want to learn how to do the background in the snowy mountains. I will link that down below, but we are just going to be covering today how to paint this leaping deer as well as the golden stars in the background. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this. The very first thing that I did was paint these golden stars, and I've actually been testing out a couple of different gold metallic paints that I purchased over the holidays. And I first started painting these stars with aqua bronze in the pale gold from Schmincke, and I personally didn't like how faint it was. I felt like it needed more of a contrast. I absolutely love this gold, but I felt like it needed more of a pop contrast, especially with these dark colors. So I then added an acrylic copper from golden to the background and then layered on top of it the aqua bronze gold to kind of give it a coppery rosy gold color. However, that being said, you can really use any gold and just paint over these stars. You can use a cheap acrylic gold. I probably, looking back on it now, would have probably done more of a cheap acrylic gold, but I wanted to play around with my new supplies. But basically anywhere where you masked off and you have these little white dots or these stars, you're going to just be painting a nice acrylic gold. And now that we have all of our stars painted, you want to make sure they are thoroughly dry once again before we get into the most anticipated part of this entire painting, which is our deer. Now, to make this as simple as I possibly can make it, because the next section of painting our deer, the reason why I left this for last is because this is going to be the hardest portion of the whole tutorial. But to make it as easy as possible, first I want to go over the paint colors that we're going to be using and then go over the paint mixtures that we're going to be using. So all of this will be set up before we start painting the actual deer. So before I start any painting, especially one that has an animal in it, I always do a paint study or a color study before. And right now I'm going to be walking you through my color study of how I approached painting this particular deer. So the very first thing that I did is I made sure to kind of choose my base color. And for this particular deer, I wanted to test out a new supply that I got over Christmas, which is gold brown from Schmincke. And I wanted this to be my base color. From there, I decided what I wanted for my highlight colors. So I chose yellow ochre, which is tried and true. I use that almost all the time. It mixes so well with so many different paints. And then the next color that I chose was Wan Brilliant number 2. I personally really like using this color because I feel like it adds a warmness to my yellows and my browns and kind of creates a nice peach tone. So I included that in my highlights colors. And another highlight color that I wanted to include is Shell Pink. And this is going to be used for the ears, which I'll get into a little bit later. Now that I have my base color and my highlight colors figured out, I next need to figure out my shadows. So the two shadow colors that I'm going to be working with is Transparent Umber, which is another new color that I wanted to experiment with. If you don't have this color, I would just go ahead and use any burnt umber. Windsor burnt umber is very similar to this particular color that I am using from Schmincke, but any type of burnt umber is really nice for a shadow brown for our deer. And then the next color that I want to use is neutral tint. And finally, my kind of secret ingredient color is going to be Winsor Blue. So a lot of you ask, how do I get these really cool kind of gray tones that have a little bit of color to them and a little bit of interest? And basically the way I do that is I take my base color, which in this case is a golden brown, and I kind of figure out where that would be on the color wheel, which gold brown is actually more in the orange tone section of a color wheel. And then what I do is I find the contrasting color to orange in this case, which would be blue. And after testing out my blues, I found for this particular painting, Winsor Blue made the really nice kind of gray tone that I was looking for. So my secret kind of ingredient paint for this particular painting is going to be Winsor Blue. Okay, so now that I have all of my paint colors kind of laid out for you, the next thing that I want to do is show you my mixtures that I use. So rarely when I'm painting animals do I use colors directly from the tube. I am usually mixing and playing around with these colors. And so I'm going to show you right now how I develop the paint mixtures for our deer that we're going to be using in just a little bit. So the first mixture that you really want to prep on your palette will be your highlight mixture. And that is going to be yellow ochre plus a little bit of that Wand Brilliant number 2. You're also going to want to prep your shell pink color with a little bit of that Wand Brilliant number 2. This is going to be more of a peachy tone that is going to be inside of your ear. Then you're going to want to prep your base color, which is going to be that golden brown mixed with a little bit of yellow ochre, and it's going to kind of warm up that color and give it a little bit more of a yellow hue. Next, we're going to work on our shadow colors or our shadow mixtures. There's 2 of them. You're going to mix golden brown with transparent umber, and then we're going to take our transparent umber that is mixed a little bit with that golden brown, and then mix that with a little bit of neutral tint. So you should get a nice kind of dark, dramatic brown on your paper. And finally, the last 2 mixtures we're going to be prepping is going to be our gray mixtures. So the first mixture that we're going to do is take your shadow mixture. In my case, I took my transparent umber plus neutral tint, that dark brown, and I mixed that with a little bit of my blue, and you're going to find it makes this dreamy, just beautiful kind of green-gray color that will be perfect for our hooves and our ears later on. And my last gray color that I'm going to be using for this painting is yellow ochre plus a little bit of neutral tint. And the reason why these 2 work well is neutral tint is actually more on that kind of purpley side, and yellow and purple are contrasting colors on the color wheel. So they make this really nice, pretty gray tone that we're going to be using for our painting today. So these are all the paint mixtures that you should have kind of ready in your repertoire. And I would go ahead and prep these on your palette into a milky consistency. Now that all of those paints are prepped, it is now time to start painting. So this is actually going to go pretty fast, and the reason for that is because I want these colors to create smooth transitions. And the way I do that is by first working fast and also developing a plan of attack. So for this painting, my plan of attack is I am going to work in sections, which I highly recommend for whatever you're painting with watercolor. And the first section that I'm going to attack is the head. Basically, I'm going to start on the nose, work back towards the head. I'm going to go down the neck, then up the ear, and then fill in the rest of the neck. So that is going to be my plan of attack for painting this head of our deer. And the very first color that we're going to lay down is our lightest highlight. So what I did is I took a little bit of yellow ochre and mixed it with that Wand Pink yellow ochre mixture and created a lighter version of yellow ochre. And I place that at the tip part of the nose and the top part of the head. And what I'm going to do is slowly pull my color back and create kind of a little bit of a bead or a watery mixture of paint and kind of push that around until I fill up the top of our deer's head and the edge of his nose. But you want to make sure you leave the very end of his nose completely white. So make sure you don't paint that area in. We're going to be painting that a little bit later. Without washing your brush, you're going to pick up a little bit of that gold brown, and then we're going to stick that once again into the bead of what we've already painted. And we're going to mix the two together on the paper and then push that then back. And fill in the back of the head as well as the bottom of the chin. And right before you hit the very back of the head, take some of that dark shadow. Once again, we're not washing our brush, we're just picking up color. And then you're going to drop that into the very back of the neck and then push it down the neck, just like so. The reason why I like to approach my paintings in this particular method is because, first off, I am painting on dry paper. So this is going to give me the maximum amount of control. But by adding my colors into those little beads or small droplets of paint that are still on the page, by adding my paint to those, it's going to create a really cool, nice wet and wet gradient that work well together. So basically, there are two ways to mix your paint. You can mix them on the palette, which we've been playing around with, as well as mix them on the paper. And I have found over the years that mixing your paints on the paper, especially with animals, just creates really cool textures to communicate that element of fur, yet still have those nice smooth gradients, which I really personally like. Okay, so now it is time to use our secret ingredient. So basically that charcoaly blue-brown that we mixed up earlier, we are going to be adding that to our ear of our deer, as well as to the back of the neck. And then what I did is I pulled that color. That color was still actually wet on the paper. So I pulled that color to the front of the neck, and what ended up happening is it mixed with the tones on the paper or the paint on the paper and created more of a gray brown. And as I got closer to the front of the neck, which is where I want my light source to be, so that should be a little bit lighter, I picked up some yellow ochre and added that to my paper as well, and then continued it forward until I hit the front of the neck. Now that that is done, we're going to let that dry on its own and we're going to attack another section. So once again, plan out where you're going to start and how you're going to flow. So what I'm going to be doing next is working on the back and the tail and then pushing down and pushing forward. The first thing that I'm going to do for this next section is mix up a bit more of our neutral tint / transparent umber and Winsor blue mixture. So basically I want more of that charcoaly color. And then I'm going to paint the very back of my tail as well as the back portion of my back. Once you have that thoroughly coated, you're then going to pick up some burnt umber. We're not going to wash our brush. And you're going to add that to the edge of what we've already laid down on the paper. This should be like a very thin line, but it's just creating a nice transition into the next color that we're going to be adding, which is gold brown. So once again, you're going to load up your brush with some gold brown, not wash it, and then you're going to add that into kind of the little bead that's left on the paper and let those colors merge and mesh together. Next, what I did is while this tail is still wet, it's starting to dry, and I noticed that. And I don't want it to dry just yet. I took another brush that I hadn't been using, wet it, and then picked up some of my light charcoal color, and I added that to the edge of the tail and then kind of touched the paint that was already laid on the page and blend those colors together a little bit more. Once you're done with that, go ahead and continue with the other brush that we were using the first time around. This is my Grumbacher size 12 round, and pick up some of your gold brown and continue down that leg. And once I was done with that, I picked up some gold brown and continued on my kind of pushing forward in my section. And then I picked up some yellow ochre and added that to my leg as well. So you're going to notice that the top portion and the back region is more of this goldy brown with those tinted gray tones. And then as you get closer down to the end of the leg, I made it more of a lighter yellow ochre. And then for the tummy portion of our deer, I mixed on my palette some gold brown with some yellow ochre to kind of create a warmer but yet lighter tone, and then painted that section as you're seeing here. And then dabbed in right underneath the scarf, I dabbed in some of the burnt umber as well as some of that charcoal mixture to create a shadow underneath that. And then I went back to my yellow ochre gold brown mixture, and I continued to paint the rest of the front leg as you're seeing here. But as I started to do that, I felt like it needed to be a little bit more warm. So then I picked up a little bit more gold brown, not a lot, and I just added that right on top of my yellow ochre to create more of a warmer reddish tone on that front leg. And as I got closer to the bottom of my leg, I added more water to my brush. I actually switched brushes as well, you can see, to a smaller brush since I'm working on a smaller area. And I added more water and pulled that color down with the water to soften that edge. So as you get closer to the feet of your deer, it actually should be very, very lightly tinted yellow, kind of yellow ochre, or in this case for this leg, a gold brown. Now, watercolor tends to dry lighter than when you first put it on the page. So at this point, I do a quick check to see, are my colors drying too light compared to what I really want them to be? Since it's still wet, I have a little bit of playtime with it right now. So I noticed on my tail, the colors were starting to lighten up a bit more than what I wanted. And since that area is still wet, I decided to drop a little bit more color in those areas and just kind of darken it up a bit. So that's kind of what you see me doing here, is just doing some quick touch-ups before I move on to the next section. And that is actually the hardest part of this whole deer, is those gradients and trying to smooth out stuff. Now we're getting into the easier portions, which is just smooth flat washes. So while we allow that back end and that tail section to dry, we are next going to be working on our antlers. And the color that I chose to paint with our antlers is I took that charcoal-y color and I mixed a little bit of yellow ochre with it to create more of a gray tone. And you are just simply going to paint this over the entire back antler as a smooth flat wash. Next, you're going to add a little bit neutral tint, a little bit more of that color to your charcoal wash and make it a bit cooler of a gray. And we are going to add this to our very back ear. Then you're going to take that color and paint the very tip of the nose, where our black nose is eventually going to go. And you're going to paint those back legs with the same cool tone gray. Once you have your legs completely painted, I went ahead and took this light gray and also touched the end of the hooves on the front legs. I went ahead and painted those with this light gray as well. Now, while your gray back legs are still kind of wet, they're not super wet, but they're damp. What I did next is I took a little bit of yellow ochre, mixed it with that charcoaly gray that we had earlier so that I get more of that warmer tone gray. And I added that to the very top portions of the legs. That's where shadows would be, underneath basically the belly portion of our deer. So in order to make it look a little bit darker, we're just going to drop in some paint and add a nice gradient to show that there's a shadow there. Next, you're going to take that same color that we just dropped into the tops of our legs, and I went ahead and painted the front of the chest, kind of just the bottom portion, not the top, as well as the underbelly of our deer with that same color. Then I took my Wand Brilliant number 2 as well as Shell Pink, mixed those two together to create a watery peach tone, and I painted the inside bottom portion of the ear and then added water to lighten it up towards the top. So the majority of your color should be inside the ear, and then as you get closer to the outside or the edge of the ear, it should be very, very light. After you're done with that, the next thing that you're going to want to do is mix up some of your neutral tint with some of that transparent umber. And basically you want to create kind of that charcoaly color again, but this time we're not going to add the Windsor blue. We want more of a brown tone. And you're going to use that particular color to paint your front antler in a smooth flat wash once again. Now, the next thing that you're going to want to do is completely dry everything on your painting. Go ahead and hit it with a heat gun. And then after you're done, you're going to kind of take a step back and look at your painting. And what I noticed is my paint dried a lot lighter than what I wanted it to. So it's not a big deal. Basically, this is an underpainting. And what we're going to do is take the same exact colors that we used earlier and basically just kind of retouch up the areas that we want to look darker. After you're done touching up, basically wherever you feel like needs to be adjusted, then add some of that charcoaly color that you mixed up earlier, but make sure it's a bit more on the cool side this time, so a little bit more of that neutral tint inside of it, and add that to the bottom of your hooves. And now we're going to be starting to paint our scarf. So the very first thing that you're going to want to do is mix up a neutral tint plus a yellow ochre. And what you're going to do is then paint these particular sections in a smooth flat wash on your scarf. after you have finished those sections, you're gonna hit those with a heat gun and allow them to dry thoroughly. Now, while I was waiting for those to dry, because they were taking a lot longer to dry than usual, I decided to just take my deep blue watercolor pencil and touch up all of the lines around my deer. So sometimes when you're using masking fluid, it doesn't have a nice crisp line. So the way that I kind of alleviate that, especially when I'm working with a very dark background, is I will use my graphite pencil to help smooth out the lines and also a watercolor pencil to help add that color back in to the edge of my deer, basically in this case. And that will help smooth out and create sharp edges around your object, whatever it may be. In this case, it's our deer. Okay, now that I've done all of my touch-ups around my deer, next I want to add the color back into my scarf. It is finally, those little sections have dried. So I'm going to go back in to my scarf, but this time I'm going to water down that color that I used before even more and paint the other sections just like so. Then I'm going to hit those with a heat gun, and I'm going to take the same color that I've been using and add a couple of shadows onto the legs just to make them feel a little bit more 3D. Then I'm going to take a micron pen and outline all of the lines that are supposed to represent the wires for the lights, the Christmas lights that are on our deer's antlers. And finally, I took some of that schminky pale gold and I added little dots for the lights on his antlers as well as stripes to the scarf. I then took a micron pen and just added little lines to make kind of a V shape for my deer's eye, as well as added just a little bit of micron lines over my deer's nose. And finally, I just took my graphite pencil and just kind of smoothed out and perfected some of the lines that were around my deer, as well as some kind of cross-hatching. I personally really like the look of cross-hatching with watercolor using a graphite pencil, but if you don't like that, you don't have to do that. And finally, the very last step of our entire deer is I took some Copic white ink and I added just some little lines with a very small brush. I believe it was size 00. And I just added some little lines to the end of the tail to make it look and appear more fluffy. And then with a dotting tool, or sometimes referred to as an embossing tool, I added these itty bitty dots, white dots, to my scarf. But that's pretty much it. That is the entire painting. So once you're finished with your deer and these little elements, that's it. You've finished. So I really hope you have enjoyed this series. I have really enjoyed putting this together and kind of taking time to work on every single part. So please let me know that you enjoyed this. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and if you're interested in other courses that I have put together, there will be links down below to those as well. So that is a wrap for this tutorial. Lots of love, y'all. Happy painting, and I will see you in the next video.